Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Deja vu.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. For season 1, we're discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 26, titled Execution. And Execution was originally aired on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1960. It was directed by David Orrick McDearmon. The teleplay was written by Rod Serling based on a short story by George Clayton Johnson. And it was starring Albert Salmi, Russell Johnson, and Than Nguyen.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
suddenly up ahead.
Just crossed over. You're moving into another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, here's Rod Serling's opening voiceover from Execution. Commonplace, if somewhat grim, unsocial event known as a necktie party. The guest of dishonor, a cowboy named Joe Caswell, just a moment away from a rope, a short dance several feet off the ground, and then the dark eternity of all evil men. Mr. Joe Caswell, who, when the good Lord passed out a conscience, a heart, a feeling for fellow men, must have been out for a beer and missed it. Mr. Joe Caswell in the last quiet moment of a violent life.
And the description from IMDb of this episode: when a 20th century scientist tests out his time machine, he accidentally retrieves a murderer from 1880, saving him from the hangman's noose. Unaware of the man's history, the scientist attempts to acclimatize him to his new surroundings. So it's a real fish out of water story.
I don't feel like that description really describes what happened in this episode at all. Like, I think these sort of raw words of these are some elements of things that happened are probably true, but it kind of sounds like it's about the professor scientist guy who's really a sort of secondary character, and we don't even get anything about his experiment. I don't know. I will continue to critique the IMDb summaries and not do the work of putting any in myself.
Well, then let's, as our tradition, praise another good opening narration, another fun, although very aggressively insulting toward poor Mr. Caswell, but a very aggressive and I thought interesting is a lot of neat turns of the phrase, like the dance at the end of the rope and the last quiet moments before his death or whatever. I like the opening narration quite a bit.
Yeah, I did too. And this is another one where he's pretty critical of the person he's talking about, but one that feels pretty justified right from the get-go. I mean, this guy shows no remorse. He doesn't want the priester to say anything. He says if he had to do over again, he'd kill people again. Like, this seems pretty accurate. This is not Serling attacking somebody who, maybe is a flawed person. This guy seems pretty bad straight through.
Yeah, but he was a great character. I really liked the actor who played him, who probably did the only good acting job, I feel like, in this episode. I just wanted to point out before we go away from it, George Clayton Johnson, the writer, also wrote Logan's Run. He wrote the 1983 Twilight Zone movie. That's the one that two kids died on set, right? Or two kids and a guy got killed by a helicopter. Wasn't that it?
I don't know. Now I have to look that up.
And then he wrote Ocean's 8, or he was a writer on Ocean's 8 and Ocean's 11. I guess I could have put those the other way around, because
I was going to say Ocean's 8 came second.
Yeah, right? Ocean's 8 was the 20.
You're talking about the recent Soderbergh Ocean's 11, not the original Frank Sinatra.
Oh yes,
one,
true.
Right?
Yeah, the 2001 Ocean's 11 and the 2018 Ocean's 8.
The Soderbergh Ocean's 11 I liked quite a lot. I remember there's one review that kind of stuck in my head that was like, it's like watching a master pianist play chopsticks. Like, yes, they do it very well, but kind of what's the point? And they were arguing that, it's kind of just a fluff popcorn movie, but it's like really well done and super entertaining. It's one of those, whenever that kind of pops on TV, that I'll stop and watch. And particularly the way the whole heist is like cut together, I think just has a ton of style. The original one, I tried to watch at one point and could not make it through because we got like halfway through the movie and they still hadn't like left the room they started the movie and just chit-chatting about nothing. It was one of the most boring movie watching experiences I've had.
Yeah, we've mentioned that before. The first one is bad. I'm going to correct myself. He actually did write the story for the original 1960s Ocean 11, so he's probably just getting writer's credits for...
Oh, that could be like characters or, based on a story by something
yes,
like that.
and then so he got credits for 11, 12, 13, and 8.
And then they'll have to do 9 and 10, and then they'll catch back up to 11 and could just loop back to that one.
Okay, yeah, so he wrote for the Logan's Run movie, the 1976 movie, then also the TV series from 77 to 78. And apparently there is an announced, he's dead now, but there is an announced Logan's Run coming out. Another Logan's Run, I guess.
And I assume if he's credited on that, it is just like based on a story by, not that they have brought his zombie back to life or brought him, had a professor bring him time traveled up from the past to rewrite Logan's Run in a future era.
Funny that you say zombie though, because looking at his IMDb profile picture, he kind of looks like Rob Zombie to me a little bit.
I thought you were going to say he looks like a zombie, which would be really mean.
Well,
but looking like Rob Zombie.
That is basically the same thing. Rob Zombie does not look like a living person.
Yeah. So this was this was not actually a Western, as most of the episode played out in current time, but it started out in Old West times. And I was like, oh, we haven't seen a Western since Mr. Denton on Doomsday, which was, one that we liked a bit. And, I was like, okay, I'm kind of in the mood now. Ready for another Western, and I was a little disappointed when it time traveled forward to, present day 1960 or whatever. But the present, we didn't get the Western until the very end.
I can tell you exactly the dates because I gleaned this from the IMDb trivia section. And it reminded me of Back to the Future because this episode takes place on November 14th, 1880, and then November 14th, 1960, and that nice round 80-year gap reminds me of going from November 5th, 1955 to November 5th, 1985, and then November 5th, 2015, the nice round numbers that these sci-fi writers put into their episodes. So Back to the Future was what I was thinking.
We just watched Back to the Future with our kids for the first time.
Did they love it?
They did. And
Good.
I have to say, one of the many things as a parent that has been surprising, but one thing specifically to kind of just narrative and film and the kind of stuff we talk about on here is I think kids can process very complex narratives at I think a much younger age than we maybe give them credit for. And there's a degree to which a lot of kids books are written pretty simply because it's the level of words they can read. But in terms of complexity, I mean, they understood the time travel, what was going on. Before it was even explained, they're like, oh wait, he can't change things because if he changes things and his parents don't get together, then he's not going to be born. They were ahead of the movie on it.
And that's why we mentioned this, I feel like over and over again in the Twilight Zone, that a lot of these episodes that have all these plot holes in it, I think are partially because there was no precedent for that. Your kids have probably seen other sci-fi, other Hollywoodized versions of time travel or whatever it is, that they just kind of know what the sort of tropes are. And for the most part, most movies do try and play within this sort of established set of rules.
Yeah, well, and let's be honest, the same way maybe I grew up, or our generation kind of grew up with Star Wars as the sort of fantasy or sci-fi touchstone that everybody knew and referenced. I think as my kids are growing up, certainly one of the pop culture touchstones and something they have grown up with was the Marvel Universe.
Right.
Which culminated in Endgame with, a whole time travel centric plot. And I don't want to get into the details of how we think that worked or didn't.
I still haven't seen it.
Oh. Well, spoiler alert, Mike, it uses time travel.
Oh, darn.
But my point being, they were able to follow that at, when that came out, what, last year-ish?
Probably.
They were, I guess, 7.
Last year or the year before, maybe.
But they were 7 and were able to follow a pretty complex time travel thing. I don't know. I'm constantly been impressed by their ability. I don't think it's them. I think, from a young age, people like stories, and we are able to, I think we're sort of built to process narrative and complex things and get it. And you're right that they've certainly been exposed to more stuff in that vein than, perhaps somebody in the 1950s had. Certainly, a young kid in the 1950s, maybe not as much, but maybe, I don't know, I think comics have been playing with time travel and multiverses forever, and that's something certainly kids grew up with for a long time. So I don't know. I guess I was struck by Back to the Future isn't a super complex plot, but like how the time travel elements were gonna play out and what the rules were gonna be, like they got that right away.
And it is also a perfect movie.
They did not get any of the 50s jokes. They kept getting confused
Sure.
about like what people were talking about and what was going. And some of the funniest one to me of that, because it's like didn't work. It was a very much a joke of the 80s itself, is when he goes in and like asks for a tab.
Yeah.
And they've never heard the word tab used to describe a soda, because Tab went out of business, probably decades ago. And so they didn't get that joke of what was going on. And I'm like, yeah, if you didn't live through that period, that joke doesn't make sense now, much less in 1950. So we're kind of like cycled back to, they had the same reaction the 1950s, counter guy working the counter did.
I think even 10 years after Back to the Future came out, that joke was already most people didn't get it. So they're doing quite well.
Do you think they were sponsored by Tab? Like, did they get some product placement money to have that in there?
Isn't it funny watching older movies and seeing how many branded products are all like Jaws? I remember Jaws, the Nintendo game, is in that movie. There's so much. Nike, I think, is what it is, as shoes in Back to the Future 2. There's so much branding in those old 80s movies. It's amazing. They must have made a fortune.
I'm not sure. I actually think back in the day that they were, they would get an agreement from the company to use their product, but not necessarily get much money for it. That's a big shift. You mentioned Jaws. When you think of Spielberg, Minority Report, when that was made, that entire budget was covered by product placement, which is, you're talking about, I don't know how much at the time, but let's say $150 million-ish movie.
That was a great segue, by the way. You talk about Jaws, that reminds me of Spielberg, Minority Report.
Because Spielberg directed Jaws. Boom.
Let's talk about Philip K. Dick then, because he wrote Minority Report.
Okay, so while we're on Philip Dick, we talked about a couple episodes ago, and we're gonna get us back on track sooner than we did last episode.
Maybe by the end of season 1, we'll get back on track.
Were we ever on track to
No.
start is the question. We were talking about the adaptations of Dick short stories into movies, and I think I had made the comment that I think a lot of the best movies of his work have been ones that did not try to adhere so closely to the source material. And Minority Report is one where I actually think the movie is better than the short story as a total package, but the most interesting thing in the source material they cut out and rewrote into something much, I think, oversimplified and less interesting. But the sort of plot elements of it that they added were much better. Because the plot of Minority Report, the short story, was pretty not very good. But the sort of core idea at the heart of it was really fascinating, and that they also cut out throughout the baby with the bathwater, I guess. And
Well,
while
now
we're on
you have to tell me.
while we're on Spielberg and product
Well,
placement.
no. Now you have to tell me what it is really quickly, because why are we talking about Minority Report right now? But now you have to tell me really quickly what the part was that was cut out from the story. I've never read the short story. I like the movie a lot, but I haven't read the story.
Okay, so in the movie, if you'll recall, there's like the three
Triplets or
precogs.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Minority Report, like the one that slightly disagreed about something, was tossed out, and basically the guy was covering up his crime by that.
Right.
In the original short story, the Minority Report said that he didn't kill somebody. So it was kind of the same setup that the Majority Report, 2 of the 3 precogs, said that this guy who ran pre-crime, or their equivalent in the short story, was gonna commit murder. The Minority Report, which got thrown out because it was in the minority, said he wouldn't kill somebody, but it actually, they were all accurate. The Minority Report was from like looking slightly later into the future, after he had seen that he was being told he was going to kill somebody, and that would have changed his actions. And then there's actually a second twist where it turns out the 2 in the majority both said he was going to kill somebody, and so that just sort of formed the Majority Report, but they actually disagreed on who he was going to kill. And one of them was like the thing that started the ball rolling. And then the Minority Report was after he found out he was supposed to kill somebody, he used that information to change his actions and not kill them, but that led him killing somebody else, which was the third report.
You completely lost me, but I do appreciate the.
Let me super
pun.
oversimplify.
No.
The interesting part
care.
was
No.
that being in pre-crime allowed him to change his future.
Okay, cool. I do appreciate your use of the phrase kept if the story is like the movie, kept the ball rolling, because that was exactly how they literally did it in the movie version of Minority Report. The little balls would come down. Anyhow, let's talk about this episode.
Wait, we got to finish up product placement since I mentioned Spielberg. E.T., right? The most famous one of all time, that M&M's turned them down to be in the movie. And it wasn't, they didn't want to pay for product placement. There's like, no, we don't want our product associated with that.
Yeah.
Biggest marketing mistake ever.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get back to this episode of Execution.
Before we get away from this very beginning, because we talked about how Caswell is a great character, I think Caswell is a great character. There were some really cool lines in there. Like you mentioned, he said he killed some guy's son, shot him in the back, and they're there to watch him hang. And he's like, yeah, the guy I shot had too much mouth, not enough brains. I'd shoot him again, basically. And his kind of parting words reminded me of two things. There's this Giles Corey is during the witch trials was convicted quote unquote of being a witch, and so they were putting stones on him to crush him. I think it was during the witch trials, whatever. He was accused of being a witch. They're putting stones on him to crush him to death, and his last words were "more weight," which I think are some of the greatest last words ever. And then of course it reminded me a bit of Braveheart when they're torturing William Wallace at the end, and he just has to swear fealty to England, and instead he yells out freedom. Those two things reminded me of that.
How about these last words? Just before his head died, his last words were, "Death is but a door, time is but a window, I'll be back."
What is that one?
That is Ghostbusters 2, the history of Vigo the Carpathian.
Wow. Speaking of time, I'm going to loop this back in. That seemed like a super quick commercial break. If that was one. Our first fade out in Netflix was only 3.5 minutes into the episode, right after they hang Joe Caswell and he disappears.
Yeah, have you gotten the sense watching through these Twilight Zones? I think they all have two commercial breaks, but the timing of them moves around a lot.
Yeah.
It's not as prescribed as it maybe is today, where you have this much time, then a break. And which I kind of dug. They're like, okay, you got to find 2 places for a break, but if one of them's 3 minutes in and the next one's 3 minutes from the end, that's okay. And it was a great place for a commercial break. His body disappears. We're like, what the hell just happened? It's a good hook. I want to come back after the break and see what's going on.
Agreed. That was my follow-up, that it was and it was kind of a neat effect, or a neat way to show that he disappeared. So they show they show the shadow of him hanging, like the horse runs out from under him and the noose, he swings at the end of the noose, and they show the shadow of him hanging, and that his shadow just disappears from the noose, and the noose is still there. It was a little cheesy looking, but it was a clever way of dealing with him disappearing into the future.
And it was actually cool. The whole thing there was one shot, because you actually see him on the horse. The guy slaps the horse runs away, and you see his legs dangling for a moment.
That's true.
And then the camera pans over to show his shadow, and then his shadow fades away and the noose is still there. You can tell they did it at a different day or time because the shadows on the noose are different. They're harder than it was when he was there, but it was still a cool effect. And I love the callback in the final scene that it picked up on that same shot.
Yep.
And you see the body reappear and it pans back over just how it did before. I will say, I like the direction of this episode quite a bit. I think this is the first time we've seen this director, but I really liked what he did with this episode.
Okay, that's a good segue too. But remember, it's a different body that warps back in, and I'm sure we'll get back to that. So then
It's a different body. I missed this all.
So then we get the professor from Gilligan's Island appears, but
playing a professor.
Which is funny because this director, you're right, he directed 3 episodes of Twilight Zone. This is the first one we've seen. He also directed 2 episodes of Gilligan's Island.
Oh, interesting.
And the professor from Gilligan's Island is the professor in this one as well. Talk about a typecast.
I wonder if the professor from Gilligan's Island remembered working with him and was like, oh, I really like that guy. Let's get him on for a couple episodes.
I think, if I recall correctly, wasn't Gilligan... Oh, no, Gilligan was later for sure, right?
Yeah, I think Gilligan's Island is after this.
Okay.
You mentioned the line, too much mouth and not enough brains. I also wrote that down. I loved it. And I feel like that describes so many people with what's going on right now. Like, shut your mouth and use your brain for a second and just think about what you're saying and doing before you run off to the Capitol with your Confederate flag and your machine gun or whatever you're doing.
Not a political podcast. Shut your mouth, cover your mouth, and cough into your sleeve.
It didn't used to be political to say like, hey, maybe people shouldn't be stupid, but apparently in this day and time, that is now a political statement that we value not being stupid.
So I'm bringing us back to this episode. So we get into the Caswell gets pulled into the future by the professor, and the professor's like lighting a cigarette, and Caswell's like, oh, I'm blown away. And so I did notice this in the goofs section of IMDb. Lighters were actually invented in 1823. So when Caswell's like very surprised by the professor's lighter, it was a little bit bizarre that's something that had been around for 60 years that he had never seen.
Although being invented versus had made its way out to the edges of the frontier and a guy like Caswell had seen, there were probably a lot of things possibly that were existed in the time of the Old West, but existed only in cities and maybe you'd never seen if you were way out on the frontier. True. I don't know. I knew nothing about lighters, so I was willing to buy it. I'm sure some historian of lighters like turned off the episode at that point and wrote an angry letter to Serling. In addition to not writing well for women, you need to do your research on when lighters were invented.
I think you mentioned in last episode, Mark, that you wrote down a lot of quotes from that episode that you thought were memorable. This is my episode like that, because the professor has a lot of so the professor's dictating into a tape recorder when he warps this guy in, and he's kind of explaining what's going on because Caswell's passed out or whatever. And the professor's like, I don't like his looks. I get a feeling I've taken a 19th century primitive and placed him in a 20th century jungle. And that quote is very profile-y, first of all, but...
Right. Well, can I read the whole quote? Because I wrote down that one as well. It says, this is after he sort of like gives all the details, like what happened, and I brought this guy in and he's taking a rest now, blah, blah. One other observation, hardly scientific. I don't like his looks. I don't like the eyes or the face or the expression. I get a feeling of disquiet. I get a feeling that I've taken a 19th century primitive and placed him in a 20th century jungle, and heaven help whoever gets in his way.
Yeah. And that reminded me a little bit of the whole theme of Jurassic Park. Like this, hey, these people, these anachronistic people don't belong here for a reason. And we talk obviously a ton with Long Live Walter Jameson, all the things that you don't even think about if you were taking a person out of time into a different time, forward or backward. I mean, if we went back in time to like the 1850s, we wouldn't be able to drink or eat anything because our immune systems wouldn't know the bugs, like the bacteria and stuff that was just naturally in the water. We'd be dead within a week, I'm sure, if we went back in time. And probably the same here. Of course, everyone is going to die if they warp into 2020 because there's everything in 2020 is trying to kill us. But that idea of taking these things out of time and just kind of throwing them in and seeing what happens, it was interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much time travel I should be more clear. So much time travel in terms of narratives, books, movies, whatever, that just ignore all of that. And I kind of think you almost have to, because you're totally right. Like, if every movie was, yes, we, threw somebody back 100 years earlier and then they died of smallpox because they didn't have the vaccine. Like, okay, we could do a lot of stories like that, but that gets old pretty quick. Let's just sort of ignore that part.
Even forget like smallpox, just like the normal level of exposure to the food and water would be. I mean, it wouldn't even be like a killer virus. It's something that these people, that isn't killing these people because they're used to it. They have like their guts are built for that kind of bacteria, and where ours aren't. And so if we went out of our time period, basically, we essentially get shocked into to death by these bugs that we're not used to, and vice versa.
Is that true? I guess I don't know about that. I would think like if you stuck to fresh fruits and vegetables, and washed them off good, those I would assume have remained relatively the same.
Well, I guess maybe if you completely wash stuff out of the ground. Well, I don't know. Actually, the stuff there's bacteria on every surface of the planet. So, it's changed. I mean, bacteria is amazing because it evolve so quickly because the lifespan of bacteria individually is so quick that bacteria is a super successful organism. I know I'm generalizing bacteria in general, but yeah, I think you would not make it too long no matter what you tried to do. I think.
Did you ever see that experiment? And they have like a time lapse of it. Like we're basically showing how kind of super powered bacteria grow. And so they start with some bacteria on like one side of a plate, and then they have something that's like, 10% of some antibacterial.
Oh yeah.
And the line, you see the bacteria sort of stops there, and then like a few cells who have the right genes like make it in, and then they just explode and multiply.
Right.
And it gets like the 20. And so by the time it like makes it across the plate, it's like, okay, now all you have left are bacteria that are immune to everything.
Right.
Then they just like dump it down the sink and spread it out to everybody.
Yeah. Which is arguably how we're in the COVID-19 situation, because everyone was so obsessed with hand sanitizer and stuff before that this bug was able to evolve. Not that it's a bacteria, we know it's a virus, but same principle that viruses reproduce quickly. Not a political podcast.
Well, I was going to say, I think I'm with you on the way overuse of just generic antibacterial things. I don't know that actually has any implications for COVID itself. In fact, it seems like it's pretty fragile and does not hold up to like, the most modest soap and anything like that. But certainly we have bacteria that are just as bad, that have come out of the same thing and definitely evolved that way. And that's what, you always get the warning when you get an antibiotic prescribed, like make sure you take the whole thing. Don't just stop when you start feeling better, because then you've just killed off the weaker ones and leave all the stronger ones to survive. What I was going to say, while we were on the professor, and we're not on him, but let's get back to him. And I don't actually know, is he ever given a name? I don't remember. I just called him the professor because he was the professor from Gilligan's Island, and he seemed to be some sort of scientist.
I think he does have Professor Mannion.
Okay, so Professor Gilligan.
Yeah.
Now, he did have a lot of interesting things. He was basically just like an exposition machine, like just kept spouting stuff up. And he was so dumb. Like for somebody who was able to create time travel, basically every decision he made was like the dumbest possible thing he could do. And that just kind of struck me as this very, I guess if you want to be sort of charitable, it was the idea of like he was very smart in his limited field of time travel study, whatever that is, but like no common sense or understanding of practicalities or how human beings work or anything. I thought that was pretty interesting, because I was like cracking up a couple of times, just like, what are you thinking?
Let's take a quick break, and then I have a thought about the professor as well. Hi, listeners. Mark and I are always working on new projects, and I'm working on a fun improvised mystery series that just released this week. Here's a little taste.
In a world filled with crime, the government assembled the Bureau, a complete collection of the nation's detectives.
They didn't technically issue me this gun that I have.
Their objective? To solve cold cases.
They would just do their damn jobs. We wouldn't have to be in this basement doing ours.
Unfortunately, most of those detectives died in a tragic karaoke outing.
Oh my God.
Leaving behind the only detectives who weren't invited that night.
I'm ready to get to work.
The Bureau Boys.
It's our first case.
It's our first case. This is our first case, okay?
The Bureau Boys solve crimes suggested by you, based on tips sent in by you.
Because when we leave this door, we're on the case.
We have work to do.
I'm just being a good investigator.
My computer isn't hooked up to the internet.
Take out your magnifying glass.
Crimes which the police couldn't, wouldn't, or sometimes shouldn't solve.
Okay, so this is a cold case.
No one thought it was worthwhile to follow up on, but that's what we're here for.
If you have a clue and don't know what to do, send it to the Bureau Boys at thebureauboys.com. For better or worse, they're on the case.
Hey, I'm ready. You ready?
I was born ready. It's going to be a fun, interactive experience, so I hope you check us out at thebureauboys.com. Thank you, as always, for listening. Okay, we are back, and we were talking about the professor before our break, which we've talked a lot about breaks in this episode so far. I also wanted to point out, yes, the professor's character was very stupid. Also, the acting of the professor, I never noticed this in Gilligan's Island. that was the most monotone, boring. The guy just pulled an 18th and 19th century cowboy out of the past, and he's like just monotone explaining what's going. He was very dully played, I thought.
You almost wonder if the actor was going for like this just sort of like very buttoned down, completely unemotional, logical, rational thing. And the way he decided to play that was
Terrible.
just like never showing any emotion. I don't know.
Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah, it was very flat. Did you wonder if I had a little bit of a King Kong vibe when he says like, yeah, I've brought you back to this time and I am going to show you around. And I just thought of like, and we've captured King Kong, this prehistoric beast, and I will, put him up on a stage in chains and show everybody, look at the old cowboy from the 1800s.
Yeah, what was the point?
That
that was a very weird time machine that he built that just goes into the past and grabs a random person and pulls them into the future.
Yeah, well, it actually reminded me of a pretty common device in Philip Dick short stories, which is the time scoop, which is depending on which particular short story it is. Sometimes they have control, sometimes they don't, but it's basically something that can like reach into another time. It kind of like grabs a chunk of whatever happens to be there and pulls it back, but they don't know till they get it. And I kind of felt like it was something like that. He just set his time for that location in space, that date and time, and whatever happened to be there. But yeah, he never really explains his experiment. The closest we get, which I'm not going to knock this because the time travel mechanics itself were not the point of the episode at all. And again, they only have 25 minutes, and I actually thought this episode they packed in a lot of other stuff. So I was okay with them not explaining the details of the time mechanics. I would have liked a little bit on like why he was doing this or what he was trying to prove or what his plan was to do with Caswell. The great line he had was, the professor starts off with, when Caswell wakes up, I'll explain to you what happened, which I appreciated the bluntness of sort of, and here's the exposition coming. A lot of Twilight Zones have some section of that where someone just explains what happened, and I appreciate him just being upfront about that. He says, this is a time machine. What's happened to you involves principles which you wouldn't understand. Yeah. So basically, like, there was time travel. We don't have time to explain it. Let's move on. And also a nice little, like, I'm sure it's true. I'm sure Caswell wouldn't understand the principles of how a time machine is built. But it was like a way to get him off on the right foot with like this nice condescending, like, I built this thing. You wouldn't understand it. Let's move on.
Yeah. Caswell, for the most part, until he actually gets into the street, handles this news pretty well, pretty spectacularly well, I would say. He's very calm until he actually gets out in the street and smashes his back through a phone booth.
I was thinking of your comments on many episodes about just people in the Twilight Zone take giant surprises very well. Like, he finds out I've been pulled 80 years into the future. All right.
Yeah, and he's immediately like, I want to see these horseless carriages that you're talking about. And like, he goes to a bar. There, before we get away from this first scene with him and the professor, though, there were a couple other cool Caswell lines. I really did dig this. He was the only one I felt like doing a really good acting job, was the guy who played Caswell. And he has a great line.
What was his accent? Because I agreed, I liked his acting. I thought he was an interesting character and well played. And he had kind of a cool accent that I don't know if it was accurate to anything, but it gave him this very unique feel.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I agree. I don't know. He had some cool lines, though. One of them from this, because he had been hanging, so the professor noticed that the rope burns around his neck. Caswell says, when you're dangling at the end of a rope, it don't matter if you're 1 foot off the ground or 100. And the professor's kind of asking him what he did. And he's like, and he ends up saying, I killed a whole territory of people. And he goes, I stopped counting after 20. It was.
The professor says, you killed someone. He says, a whole territory full. I stopped counting after 20.
Yeah.
Which that was, I would say, not the brightest move by Caswell either, unless he might be a quicker judge of like kind of who's a threat and who's not. Like, I was actually willing to buy that he pretty quickly sized up the professor and like, okay, he's not going to do anything to me. But I was thinking, like, you've just been pulled into the future, into this time. You don't really know what all the technology they have. Like, maybe the professor has a laser gun and, can immediately just zap you as soon as he finds out for sure that you did something bad. If I was Caswell, I would have like played it a little cooler, and it seemed like maybe he did at the start, because when the professor's dictating into his little machine, he says that Caswell told him he was, like a what's the term, cattle boss, like and they were bringing a bunch of cattle somewhere and he just got kind of pulled out of the saddle. So Caswell was smart enough to sort of lie initially, but then by their second conversation, it's just like, yeah, I killed a whole bunch of people. What are you going to do about it? And then the professor, of course, follows through on his continuing dumbness and is like, well, I'm going to send you right back to where you were in that hangman's noose. Now, if you would kindly step back into the time machine here.
Then the third line that I thought from this one, before we get away from this part, or before I get away from this part, he says, I don't want to do the exact line, but he basically says to the professor, you're fancy, like your words sound good when you're nice and comfortable here, but try saying those same words when your back's against the wall, when you need a food or a jacket or something from someone on the range. And that line reminded me of all the celebrities that are doing their "we're all in this together" videos from their 6,000 square foot mansions, not even 6,000, 10,000 square foot mansions, that it's like, okay, yeah, we're all in this together. Thank you for letting us know.
I haven't been able to go to the public pool. I've been stuck at my home pool.
Yeah. Which one? The heated one or the non-heated one? Indoors or outdoors?
Oh, the one with the current, so I can swim laps. And
then I have a question for you, Mark, that is applicable
to
this.
Can I say before you get off that line, I thought that was a really... It's funny, like every line you quoted are the same ones I wrote down, like that, because this was chock full of really like nicely written lines and interesting things. I thought that Caswell's speech there was really nice, like well written, well performed, and I kind of wish Serling would have saved it for like a character in another episode who was not so despicable, right? Because from everything we've heard from Caswell, even what in the Old West scene that starts, or even what he's saying later, we don't get the sense this was a guy who was killing because that was the only way he was going to eat or put clothes on his back. Like, this is a guy who just kind of shot anybody who he felt like he wanted to, because he's just an evil person. And so I was like, oh, that would have been such a powerful speech coming from somebody who actually maybe did do some of these wrong things for survival, and that's not the sense I had from Caswell.
That is true. That I think your comparison to King Kong was kind of apt, because he sort of was a wild beast, and I thought of that when he breaks out. He gets trapped in a phone booth later in the episode, and he which by the way is the second time. I also noticed this in the trivia. The second time that we've seen a character trapped in a phone booth. We've seen the episode. Do you remember which other character got trapped in a phone booth?
Trapped in a phone booth? No, the only one that came to mind for me was, and then the sky was opened when there's the guy gets the calling his parents in the phone booth to find out he never existed, or whatever the details that were. But what's the one where someone was trapped?
Our very first episode, Where Is Everybody?
Did he get trapped in a phone booth?
Yes.
I didn't even remember that.
Well, at least according to the trivia. I didn't really remember that either. But I
loved how he broke out. Like, Caswell was
clever.
His shit together. Yeah, he like puts his feet up against one wall and just like bashes himself through the glass. I don't know if that's doable, but
I think
he had a head on his shoulders.
Yeah, and he did it like immediately. When he was trapped in there, he was like immediately, and that's why I think he did a really good acting job. He immediately turned into like a caged animal and broke himself out, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And I have a question for you, Mark, that is relevant to this episode.
We may as well talk about something relevant to this episode.
Do you have a gun in your desk at school?
I'm going to plead the fifth on the grounds it might incur.
So when they start to struggle, when Caswell and the professor start to struggle, the professor starts reaching into his desk in his lab that we're sitting in. And the only thing I can think that he was going for was a gun.
And I think the assumption is that is what he was getting, and that's where Caswell got the gun for later.
Right. Why does he have a gun in his desk?
Well, I'm going to ask the same question, but spin it around a different way. Given what he suspected and then knew of Caswell, why didn't he have a gun like on him ready? Like, Caswell was passed out for a while.
That's true.
He already said, like, I don't like the looks of him. I see these, looks like he was being hanged. Like, instead of confronting him like, so I noticed you were being hanged. Like, were you a villain and killed some? Yeah, we're going to have to send you back to like, the professor was just dumb. If he had a gun right there, like get that gun on you so it's ready if Caswell snaps. If you think he's a murderer,
That's a good point.
instead it's like just in the drawer, like, and he's badly. I will say, we've criticized some fight sequences from Twilight Zone before, and calling them fight sequences is actually giving them more credit than they were. There's several times where people are trying to steal spaceships and or airplanes, and basically like there's one punch knocks somebody out and the guards are dead and it's over. They had a couple really nice kind of fight sequence stunts in here, both the one with him and the professor and then the later one with him and the, second petty criminal, that I really thought were like well staged and done, and with some good stunt work, like pulling people over desks and stuff.
Okay, but the second fight, Caswell's stunt double is hilarious. He looks absolutely nothing like him, and he kind of looks like a beefy Michael Caine.
Maybe it was Michael Caine.
By the way, did you go back to look at that extra in our last episode that missed his mark?
I did not have a chance, but when I was listening, I still want to, because when I was listening to the episode when I was out on a walk the other day, I was like, oh, I got to get back and watch that. I just haven't had a chance.
Yeah, you have to.
We need to get through the end of the kids' school year, because things are just going downhill as the year goes to an end, and our kids are super stressed and freaked out about the pandemic and not getting to be with their friends and all that stuff. And I don't know.
Sorry.
My point just being like, yeah, I keep thinking I'm going to have time now that my semester ended, and we're just spending a lot of time managing the kids right now.
So then Caswell goes out into the world. It was interesting. He's kind of like bumping into people, and he's covering his ears because of all the noise on the streets. One thing that I thought was kind of a bizarre directing choice, as he's walking, they're kind of doing that sort of hero angle from down looking up at Caswell, and he walks underneath a marquee. And I think it was just like a clearly built marquee, like a stage marquee, because I don't think the undersides of marquees are supposed to look like that. So it was kind of a weird choice. I thought it just looked very like open, like it was like exposed, almost like an exposed beam cabin or something like that. It looked like very unfinished. And I'm like, that you probably could have avoided that by not shooting this from that low angle.
And I didn't notice that one. I did notice that from the very get-go, when we're back in the Old West scene, they actually use a lot of the low-angle hero shot on Caswell. I guess, because he is the protagonist of the episode, so it kind of made sense. But it was this weird contrast of like shooting him really sort of like heroically, meeting his death with stoicism, yet he's clearly a total like evil asshole. Like it was this interesting contrast, and that was a place I thought was a weird shot, just using that angle there. Can we talk about the bar he goes into?
Yes, because this is my second favorite bartender, I think, after and when this guy was opened. I love that bartender, and I love this bartender because he's the most patient bartender on the planet. But go ahead.
Right. Well, I agree with you. He's very patient because so Caswell like stumbles in past some people. That was a really weird cut, by the way, too. It goes from right after he busts out of the phone booth and he's like holding a cloth up to his face, like wiping blood or something. Cuts right to inside a restaurant. The cloth is gone and he just sort of barges in, but then like takes a chair and destroys the jukebox.
Yeah. And
the bartender's like, you're going to have to pay for that. And the bartender, I think, behaves fairly appropriately till he sees, Caswell pulls his gun and he's like, okay, I'll give you a drink, whatever. He's still behaving appropriately. But then he has like opportunities for Caswell to leave. And instead he becomes super friendly. Like, oh, let me demo for you how a television works. And I was like, shouldn't you just be trying to get this guy out of here who like just threatened you with a gun and like ran in and randomly demolished your jukebox? Like call the police or get him out instead of like, let me show you around. Check out this new technology.
Well, as someone that's trying to open a theater that's going to serve alcohol, he was the only one in the bar and he was chugging liquor. So I think he thought that he needed this guy. But his line is better. It's not
he
just...
was chugging liquor that he stole at gunpoint.
Then,
like,
then the bartender, though, offers him 2 bottles to take home. I love this bartender. But it was a better line than, hey, you're going to pay for that. Before he says that, he goes, after he smashes up the jukebox, he goes, it's going to be an expensive evening for you, pal.
That was good.
It was a great line. About the bartender, so Caswell sets his gun on the counter and he's kind of looking back over his shoulder. Bartender, definitely within arm's reach, probably should have grabbed his gun at that point away from him. I did agree that the bartender was maybe a little bit too patient. And then when he goes and demonstrates the TV, turns on the TV, two things. It was, remember those days when a TV had to warm up and the picture would like fade in?
Yep.
That was neat.
And then when you turn it off and it goes down to like this
little
tiny
plop.
little glowing dot in the center that slowly fades out.
And that TV had a way better picture than my current TV does, my 4K TV does, because that was the most perfect, clear picture.
Yeah, and also, so they turn it on and it's a Western, which I thought was cool. And, you know, it's a Western like about to be a standoff. And so Caswell thinks it's, of course, a real person, tiny through a window, I guess, or whatever he thinks is going on, and like tries to shoot back at him. But I did think it was interesting. It was set up for the scene to make sense that the guy's basically like looking at and going to shoot right at the camera. You never see that.
No.
Like they're all like, he'd be talking to somebody off screen to the right or left. Like you usually are not going to break the fourth wall in your random 50s TV Western.
Right. It was more like a video game almost. Though, by the way, get to make one of my favorite recurring Deja Reviewed references and talk about the arrival of a train.
I knew you would bring that up.
because Caswell's reaction was that this guy is actually going to shoot at him. By the way, Caswell, no wonder he got caught. Not a very good killer, because the TV cowboy definitely shot first and would have killed him if it was actually a guy shooting through a tiny little window.
So if we're going to bring up film history, do you also know the film The Great Train Robbery, which is like one of the earliest surviving narrative films?
Never watched it, but yes, I do know it.
Okay, well, and so that kind of famously has a shot of a cowboy, you know, one of the outlaws, like pointing a gun right at the screen and shooting it. And interestingly, it's like completely disconnected from the narrative. And they actually sent, you know, to the theaters, they told the theaters, you can put this at the beginning of the movie or at the end, like either way you want it. Cool.
Okay.
That's all I had on that.
Yeah, very good. So we get back to the lab. Caswell finds his way back to the lab because he wants help from the professor to get out of this situation. And the professor, he's knocked unconscious. As he's waiting for the professor to regain consciousness, this other, like you said, petty criminal comes in. And do we have a reason that he was robbing a lab at night?
No, and he even says like, yeah, I assumed he wouldn't keep much cash around. Like,
yeah,
that was the most random, like, I was.
So why are you here?
I like this episode quite a bit. That was the most writers coincidental, and like,
yeah,
we
it was
need
weird.
something to happen. Like, okay, another criminal happens to show up and rob the lab. It's like, what kind of a shady town is this where every night in every building some criminal is going to show up? Because that's the only explanation for him showing up there.
So there's a great, like you said, a fight scene with Michael Caine, Fat Michael Caine, and this other petty criminal. The illusion was really good.
I just want to give props again to like Caswell or Caswell's stunt double, like grabs the other guy by the arm and like whips him over the desk.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing, there was a similar scene with the professor where he like flips over the desk, where I thought for a second it was just going to be like a dummy or something for that shot, but it was actual actors and they like get up in the same shot and keep fighting. It reminded me a little bit almost of a more contemporary fight sequence style where they play it out in a little bit of a wider and not as many cuts, so you can see it's actually actors doing it and that they're not faking things through clever editing.
And then the Bourne Identity came along, and I have not been able to follow a fight scene since that movie. I have no idea who's hitting who. I don't know what's happening in fight scenes in movies anymore.
Agreed. While I'm on stunts, can I just flash back 1 second? There was a pretty nice stunt when he's out running through the streets and stuff, where he like runs out into the middle of the street and cars are just whizzing by him on both sides. Actually, I mean, that's not a super difficult stunt, but it's a dangerous one to have like cars speeding by at full speed. And I thought that was nicely done too.
I thought he was going to get hit actually at one point. Not hit and killed, because
well, the one car we thought was going to hit him, like he stops and shoots it.
Yes. Yeah, there was there was some neat stuff that they did in this. So the fight ends with a very nice allusion back to his hanging, because the petty criminal wraps a like shades, window shades cord around his neck and chokes him. And I will say it bothered me though. I hate in TV and films when they choose strangling as a way of killing someone, because even if you strangle someone to unconsciousness, which is very difficult to do, that's probably going to take you 5 minutes in and of itself. You have to continue strangling them and depriving them of oxygen to actually kill them, because if they're just unconscious, and you stop strangling them, they will start breathing and their organs will start getting oxygen again. So stop using strangling as a way to kill people in your movies, in your TV and movies, everyone, because unless you're going to show us a 15-minute strangulation scene, it doesn't make sense.
And I will take your word on that. I have less experience killing people than you do, so
True.
I've never tried to strangle somebody to death. So I will take your word on how it went.
I mean, unless you're going to crush someone's windpipe, but that's not the case either. And that would be very hard to do. Anyhow, just a thought.
But it was a nice callback to the
Yes.
from the beginning, him getting strangled there. And I actually thought for a second the episode was going to end there. Like that would have been like, Serling comes in and like poetic justice, escape from the noose, back to the noose in the Twilight Zone or something like that. But they actually have the additional twist where petty criminal number 2, pretty stupidly, also like, I think Caswell was probably the brightest one in this episode.
Yeah, for sure. The bartender.
He's like,
and then Caswell.
the bartender. Yeah. Okay. But so the criminal's like, again, we don't know why he's robbing a lab. He goes to the file cabinets, which clearly have combination locks on them. He like half-heartedly gives the lock a turn and then like pulls on the doors, and then starts fiddling with the equipment, like turning dials and stuff, turns on the time machine. And then it's very clear he's going to like go inside and get sent back at that point. But that was, I don't think that was the brightest petty criminal.
No. And just to finish your thought, Mark, so he is in the machine, gets warped back into taking Caswell's spot. So Caswell gets his justice in the future, and this petty criminal for killing Caswell gets his justice in the past because he ends up at the end of the rope.
Yeah. And I was wondering too, and this is something, in time travel, you always play with like, whether the changes were sort of instantaneous or whatever. I was wondering like how long they were standing there staring at the empty noose before the other guy appeared. Cause it didn't seem like it was like Caswell disappeared and was immediately replaced by somebody else. It was Caswell disappeared. They like hang around watching the noose for some indeterminate period of time. And then this other body appears inside it.
I was assuming that it was relatively soon afterwards, but you're right. It isn't an instantaneous
I was assuming
thing.
it was that it was real time. So however long Caswell was in the future, which was like 24 hours, they were still there 24 hours just staring at the empty news.
It's like the same people that were waiting for Where Is Everyone? The reporters that were just waiting for him for 2 weeks to come out of his.
That's right. Outside the warehouse.
So there's. Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm going in a different direction. So.
Oh, okay. And that I kind of only have like a thematic thing to talk about, so that may be the last thing. So talk about whatever else you want to before closing narration.
Okay, yeah, because I'm about done. Two little detail-y things. One was when the professor first brings him back and says like, you're 80 years from the last of your correct recollection, and you're in New York City. I think because Caswell was a cowboy and just the way the professor delivered in this monotone, you're in New York City. All I could think of was that old salsa commercial.
This one's made in New York City.
New York City. and all I could picture was Caswell saying that. And then the other thing, when I first find out that they've pulled him forward, before he says that before the professor explains that he doesn't know anything about his past or whatever, I was wondering if this was going to be like some sort of twist on like Demolition Man, where for some reason they needed like a Wild West villain bad guy to solve some problem in the future. Like you remember Demolition Man?
Yeah.
Wesley Snipes is like the old time in the future, but like was this villain from the past, and now there's not much crime. So none of the police know how to deal with him when he gets out and goes on a rampage. So they have to like bring back Sylvester Stallone, the frozen cop from 200 years ago, who knows how to deal with criminals from 200 years ago. And I thought it was going to be like a reverse of that. And I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't, because I wanted to try to find out what would be the situation where the only solution is you need to bring like an 1850s cowboy villain into the present.
That Pace Picani commercial, by the way, I think if I recall correctly, one of the versions of that, after they're like New York City, like a very cowboy looking guy is like, somebody get a rope, or says something like that.
I think you're
'Cause
right,
They're
yeah.
going to like kill this guy for bringing bad salsa to their. It was funny.
Well, which also I actually did make a note on this that relates to for this episode. Now we knew Caswell is basically evil, but the professor, all he knows is that this guy was apparently being hung. Like, I don't actually know if I trust Wild West justice enough to assume that because they were hanging somebody, he was like a horrible villain. Like, maybe he just brought the wrong salsa, or maybe he looked at the sheriff's daughter the wrong way or something. I have no historical evidence of this, but my sense is that justice was a little more fast and loose down back in those times, and particularly out on the frontier, and being hung would not necessarily have meant that was what they reserved for the worst of the worst. That could have been just, you did something somebody in power didn't like.
Okay, that would be a good segue to my final thought. If you are
Yeah,
through
go for
yours.
it.
Okay, so obviously a big theme of this, I don't know if an overt theme, but capital punishment is obviously touched upon in this episode. And I like when the 2-bit criminal gets sent back to the past, the guys that are there are like, the first thing they ask themselves is whether they hanged an innocent man. And I thought that was a neat moment, that you'd rather see 10 criminals go free than kill one innocent man. And at the very beginning, the kid's dad, the kid who had been killed by Caswell, says that he wants it to hurt. He wants his hanging to hurt. And I thought, especially in this day and age, I mean, of course, capital punishment is always going to be a hot button issue, but is that the point of capital punishment? And there's a line by the professor early on in the episode where he says, right and wrong, they can try to beat into you, but justice, and then he kind of just trails off at like that knowledge of justice. And I think you're right. And I think they even overtly kind of say that Caswell is quote unquote pure evil. He's a bad guy. Like, he's done something bad. Capital punishment. Is it? Is it? And you're living in a state that celebrates and loves capital punishment of Texas. You know, I have a hard time. I feel like I go back and forth on capital punishment. Not really back and forth. I feel like if the whole point of punishing people is to try to make them better people, which is my opinion or my thought that what punishment should be, you're trying to rehabilitate and you're trying to fix these things. Obviously, that doesn't jive with capital punishment. But then on the flip side, if you do have someone that is the caricature version of pure evil, like Caswell apparently was in this, are they beyond rehabilitation? I don't know. That was my thinking through this.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think you kind of have 3 possible purposes for jail or punishment or whatever it may be. One is the rehabilitation one, which you would like to hope that a lot of that should be geared towards, whether it is or not. 2 is the deterrent factor. So
Right.
maybe somebody who would commit a crime but doesn't want the possibility of jail or capital punishment. And all the data seems to show that capital punishment does not serve as a deterrent. Like, there aren't people who are making decisions whether to commit crimes or not based on whether a state or a country has capital punishment.
To be fair, it is the ultimate deterrent for that individual person, though.
That'll teach you to go do that crime again and get killed again. You know, and then the third is sort of safety of the populace. So
Right.
if Caswell really is this evil person, you could certainly argue that either sort of lifetime behind bars or capital punishment would be appropriate. He seems non-rehabilitatable. You know, I would say, and I think you're right, that the last kind of comments they're making about did we kill an innocent person is getting at the issue with capital punishment, I think, is less whether it's possible that some people are irredeemable. And I think probably some people are not going to be rehabilitated. But can you ever, you know, we have so much evidence of how many people on death row have been wrongly convicted and in some cases exonerated, you know, before they were killed. In some cases afterwards, we find out it was wrong. Like, it's always going to be an imperfect justice system. And some people are going to be released who shouldn't have been, and some people are going to be punished who shouldn't have been. To me, the issue with capital punishment is it's, you know, killing somebody. It's completely final. There's no taking it back if we find out later we made a mistake. And it sort of assumes the perfection of justice that we know is not. you know?
I'll add a fourth to those. I think those three categories are completely spot on. The fourth, and what the kid's dad, I think, was alluding to, is retribution, or like revenge for these, and just making these people feel better. And like, it's crazy that, to me, even if someone did something horrible to someone I cared about and they were going to be put to death for it, I could not go witness an execution of a human being. Like, I don't care how much I hated the person. I don't think I could sit and watch someone be killed. And like, it was a spectacle. I mean, through the course of human history, it's basically been a spectacle when there's a hanging or a beheading or a guillotining. And it's just, we're a weird race. I think Serling was right about, in the last episode, what horrible people we are.
Agreed. And getting off of capital punishment for a second, if you go back to, I don't know if this was still around in the Wild West period, but to, let's say, earlier American times, when you had things like the stocks, that seems to not really have a direct deterrent effect or keeping somebody out of circulation for super long. It really is kind of this retribution, or like, we want to see this person get humiliated and shamed, and that seems to be something that, generally speaking, we've kind of moved away from. Like, I don't think there's not the sense that prison should be pleasant, but I don't think anybody currently is on board with the, like, well, if they're in prison, we should be like whipping them and torturing them so that they suffer for their crimes, you know? Hopefully that's, us being a little more enlightened, maybe.
Good for us. Should we get to some closing narration?
Yeah, let's do it, because I like the closing narration of this too.
So do I. This is November 1880, the aftermath of a necktie party. The victim's name, Paul Johnson, a minor league criminal and the taker of another human life. No comment on his death save this: justice can span years. Retribution is not subject to a calendar. Tonight's case in point in the Twilight Zone. Paul Johnson, that was his name, the two-bit thugs.
And I like him being a minor league criminal, because this guy was definitely not getting called up to the majors. They were like, well, we told you to go rob somebody, and there were all these like ritzy penthouses around, and you went to a lab and tried to break into the file cabinet. So
you're an idiot.
Yeah, we're sending you back to single A.
And I like too that, so if he was just a minor league criminal, he's probably doing petty stuff. I like the fact that it was a fitting, even the fact that he killed another criminal who was already sentenced to death, that it was a fitting end for Paul Johnson that he was killed for. Like, the value of Caswell's life, just because he was a criminal or a killer or whatever he had done, wasn't diminished. I think the underlying thing to Serling in that kind of closing narration and in sort of the symbolism of it, that yes, he was a bad guy, possibly a pure evil guy, but the value of his life was still such that Paul Johnson deserved to die for it, which I guess then the argument is, why did Paul Johnson then deserve to die? But I guess we could spin ourselves in circles on that if we wanted to.
Yeah, I did think this, we've talked a lot about Serling's progressivity, and I think you saw some of that within this episode. The comment you noted about them wondering if they killed an innocent man, and, the preacher even says then, I hope not. I pray to God not.
Yeah.
Like, the line in the closing narration where it says justice can span years did sound like that this was a form of justice.
Right.
And I think that was an interesting question of this episode, is what does justice really entail or require? Because you're right. It certainly seems like, in terms of degree, we know Caswell killed at least 20 people and then he stopped counting. And Paul Johnson was a petty thief who kind of I don't want to say entirely in self-defense, because it was kind of in defense in the middle of a fight with another criminal while he was robbing a place. So there's all these factors going on.
Yeah.
But like, it certainly seems like, in terms of degree, his crimes were less than Caswell's, and that justice sort of, exacts the same tribute from both of them.
Yeah.
It left us thinking, which I think a lot of the best Twilight Zone episodes do.
Agreed. You know what else some of the best Twilight Zone episodes have, Mark?
Lots of sweat.
Lots of sweat. Should we rank our sweat level?
Man, one of my first notes is, man, is Caswell sweaty at the start?
Yeah, everyone was sweaty.
He never really gets unsweaty.
Nope.
Yeah, so some people were, I think everyone in the Old West time was a little bit sweaty at least, The professor wasn't super sweaty. Caswell was like borderline drippy almost the entire time.
Johnson was
Did you
sweaty.
notice though? He's like super sweaty, but there's no in Caswell when we see him at the start. There's no sweat or oil on his hair. His hair actually
Right.
looks like kind of dry.
Yeah,
with
yeah,
just
yeah.
like running down his face sweat.
Yeah.
I also just had to note when he first comes into the future / present, whatever it is, and he's like lying on a pillow while the professor is about to explain things to him, and he kind of tilts his head back so the professor can see, or not so he can see, but allowing the professor to see the noose marks.
Right.
And there's just like a puddle of sweat in the crevices on his neck that I thought
Yeah.
was like, man, this guy's been sitting there dripping for a while. So I would say this was a pretty sweaty episode, maybe like an 8.
I had an 8 as well. So to
All right.
give you an idea, Mr. Denton on Doomsday was a 7. Purple Testament was an 8. I think we're correct in saying 8.
Yeah. And that was a retcon on.
Yeah,
Mr.
we had to
Denton
retcon
we did
Mr.
recently,
Denton.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think we had as like a 4 or 3 or something
Yeah.
before.
No, this was we've had a not anything super sweaty lately, and man, this
Yeah.
came back with a vengeance. All right.
So let's rate this. And I think you should go first.
Okay. I think honestly, this was one of the episodes that it was not my favorite, and there were like things throughout that I thought were kind of weird or didn't like, but just like as a whole, I really dug this. I would be in like the probably 4.5 range.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
See,
Where are you?
I was at like 2.5. Like I didn't dislike this episode, but it wasn't super memorable. And then I was looking back at some of our other ratings, and I was like, I don't like this episode better than any of these. And so
That's probably true. All right, you talked me down there because I'm thinking of what some of the other ones were rated to 4 and 4.5, and I don't like this as much as those. I'll say what I did like with this. I think it's kind of the opposite of what was the episode that you loved? The
Lonely.
Long Live Walter Jameson.
Oh yeah.
That you loved and I liked a lot, but I was like, the kind of execution of it,
Sure.
I didn't think was up there. This was one I really dug the execution. I loved
Agreed.
the use of lighting throughout. I think the performances were uneven, but Caswell as the lead, I always thought was great. And I was entertained and had suspense kind of the whole way through. This is one I really never did know where it was going to go and how it was going to wrap up. And I thought the way it took some of the twists were interesting.
It was a good final
The
twist.
montage of him going through the city, I thought had like a lot of like energy to the shooting and the editing and I was with this episode the whole way through.
And it was a good final twist. And the guy who played Caswell is going to be in 2 upcoming episodes, apparently, of The Twilight Zone as well.
Hey, did you notice the part where it's right after he knocks out or kills the professor or whatever, and he's leaving, and the tape recorder is like got knocked on the floor, is like playing itself back. And right where he's listening to the professor say he doesn't like his expression, he is like the most dumb, like
like ape-like
primate. Primate. Like I have not progressed to humanity yet. Like what is sound coming from? But I really like the execution. But as I've said before, I don't think the execution should be the primary thing. The story was fine. It was entertaining and suspenseful. I don't think this one made us think as much as some other ones have. And there were some, I think holes in the story. So yeah, you've talked me down from 4.5. I definitely like this better than like a 2.5. Can I get you to somewhere in the 3 range, 3 or 3.5?
Do you like this episode better than I Shot an Arrow in the Air?
Yes.
Okay, really? And you like it better than Perchance to Dream?
I think back to Perchance to Dream.
When he's on the couch and there's carnival with the cat lady.
I would say probably in the same range. Maybe I like a little bit more.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to give you... So right now you're saying that this is on the level of... And When the Sky Was Opened...
Okay, what's the level right now?
Okay, these are... So I guess I've talked you down a little bit, but these are the 4.5s. One for the Angels.
No. You already talked me down past that. Give me like some 3s and 3.5s.
Okay, some 3s. Where Is Everybody? Perchance to Dream. I Shot an Arrow in the Air. People Are Alike All Over. 3.5s. Mr. Denton. The Lonely, which I know you didn't like. And that's it, I think.
Okay, so I have a terrible memory, so I sometimes have a hard time remembering exactly what I felt about some of those other ones. The People Are Like All Over we just saw, I definitely like this better than that, personally. But give me your rating, and this might be one where we just need to average them out, like we did with the Love.
I had it as a 2.5, but I mean, I guess I would be okay with a 3.
You want to go with the 3?
Sure. There are 2.5s that I like better than this, I think.
What's a 2.5 you liked better than this?
Or I should say that all the 3s I like better than this that I listed. I think that this is on par with some 2.5s. So Elegy, I think this is about on par with. The Hitchhiker, I think this is about on par with. And this is ridiculous that we have Walking Distance this low, but Walking Distance is a 2.5. So you're officially going on record as saying...
Do you want to go ahead and retcon Walking Distance? Because every episode you're like, we need to bring up Walking Distance.
I think we do. I think we got to make it at least a 4.
What do you want to bring it up to?
I think like a 4.
Hold on. Let me look at my notes from Walking Distance. That was like ages ago.
That's the 5th episode.
5th episode, man.
It's about, he goes back to his town. There's time travel. The guy, he buys a soda for like 5 cents.
Yeah.
The Marty something, the kid gets hurt he gets hurt as a kid on the carousel.
Yeah. Okay. I think, we could, I would say 3.5, but if you want to make that one a 4, that's fine.
I think a 4. Let's say 3.5. Okay. Then we'll have another 3.5 to discuss. Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better. I guess I'd be okay with a 3 for this because there's nothing super memorable.
What I would say about those other ones you mentioned, particularly Elegy and Hitchhiker, the first 2 you said, like, think about how much nothing happens in those ones. Like, this one was entertaining. Stuff was happening throughout the episode.
True. And the twist, I do think was, well, I don't know. I kind of like the twist at the Hitchhiker too, but the twist was a little bit better, I think.
And this had like a multi-twist, and I think the execution on this one was much better than Elegy for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that.
They didn't have to cut to a freeze frame of 2 of the people on a bridge in the middle.
I'm good.
Although
with
I did
3.
notice, because now I look for this because you keep mentioning it at the very end when, what's the petty criminal's name? Walter
Johnson something Johnson.
It's not Walter Johnson. That was someone we just saw. Paul Johnson. Oh, Walter Jameson. Paul Johnson. When he's lying on the ground dead, you definitely see him breathing, which I now look for since you pointed it out.
I know it's impossible not to. But okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with a 3. We're going to call it a 3.
Okay, fair.
Okay. Mark, you ready to guess next week's episode?
I am, sir.
This is going to be a tough one. The Big Tall Wish. What do you think The Big Tall Wish is about?
Oh, wait a minute. So can I just say, because that just reminded me of my guess for execution was a guy who is about to get executed gets some way to escape, but there's a monkey's paw.
I know.
Right on.
I had a very knowing because I remembered this episode from my first watch through, and I knew you were pretty close in that one.
Although he still gets executed.
True.
Thus the monkey's paw.
Yes.
I really hope there's an episode called The Monkey's Paw somewhere along the way.
I hope you would stop stalling and tell me about The Big Tall Wish.
Okay, what was this called? The Big Tall Wish?
The Big Tall Wish.
Somebody is having a birthday and wishes to be tall.
Oh, very good. And that person is Tom Hanks, and they wish on a genie.
So we did just watch Big a couple weeks ago, so I'm not saying that influenced my guess, but that definitely influenced my guess.
Well, we're going to find out. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Next week's episode is episode 27 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled The Big Tall Wish. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe because that helps us out. Or you can find us at dejareview.com, where you can leave us a voicemail, send us a text message, find all of our social media. And we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.
Deja vu.